Welcome back. Lobby group Human Rights Watch has accused Tanzania's government of bulldozing and abusing the media. The body says journalists in the country work in an atmosphere of fear. It said in a statement on Wednesday that renowned journalist Erick Kabendera has been arrested without trial since Monday in the latest example of media crackdowns and the authorities' troubling use of citizenship in investigations to harass government critics and repress free expression. The HRW called on the government to immediately release Kabendera or charge him with a legally recognizable crime. Oryem Nyeko is the Uganda and Tanzania researcher in the Africa division. He joins us now via Skype for more on this story. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you take us through the position of the HRW on this matter?
Thank you. The situation as regards to Erick Kabendera's arrest is fairly straightforward in that Kabendera was arrested on Monday by plainclothed authorities. It turns out that they were affiliated with the police, who announced that they had detained him the next day because they were conducting investigations into his citizenship. Now, whether this is the case or not is questionable because we don't know. He has not been officially charged with any crime, and we are calling on the government to either formally charge him with a crime or release him because the situation is not very clear at the moment.
Did they come out in the clear as to why he's been arrested?
The police spokesperson said on Tuesday that he had been arrested due to an investigation into his citizenship as to whether he's a Tanzanian or not. This is a part of a wider pattern of that the government has used in the past to investigate, to essentially harass people who have been either critical of the government or in some sort of involved in some form of have been critical of the government and has been a tool to essentially repress free expression in the country. So it's unclear as to whether that is the case at the moment or whether there are legitimate charges that can be laid against Kabendera, which we would urge the government to either do or to lay or to release him immediately.
I mean, judging from the manner in which he was arrested, has any communication been made with Mr. Kabendera, perhaps by the family, with regards to his safety?
He was able to meet with his wife today, but had not had access to his lawyers. He is going to be attending a bail hearing tomorrow, upon which time, if he's granted bail, he will be obviously have access to the public. But otherwise, he had been kept in detention pretty much since Monday without access to other people.
You know, Tanzania has quite a track record of media repression, and we do understand that another journalist who went missing 2 years ago, Mr. Azori Gwanda's disappearance. Now, the authorities still cannot come out in the clear whether he's dead or alive. Do you know the details surrounding that disappearance?
Well, Azori Gwanda's disappearance has really been surrounded by a lot of murkiness. There are not a lot of answers about how he went missing, who took him. His wife reported to police that unidentified people had put him in a white vehicle. He had gone with unidentified people and put him in a white vehicle whom she didn't know. He said he was going to return, but he never did. And since then, the government has said that it's conducting investigations into his disappearance, but has not provided any concrete answers. That is another case of the government's responsibility really to conduct legitimate investigations, not necessarily being successful as far as providing answers to the family or to the wider public. And that's something that we also urge the government to do more of.
You know, President Magufuli's government posits itself as a government, as a legitimate government that, seeks to protect and uphold human rights in that country. But with regards to media, reports of media repression in the country, has the government come out in the clear to explain its position on this matter?
In regards to the disappearance of Azori Gwanda or
Just the
generally?
general issue of media repression in Tanzania.
Well, the government has spoken out on individual cases and expressed that for example, with Azori Gwanda case, that it's conducting investigations. But the sense that many people have is that the work that it's doing is not adequate. But also, it's also very clear, on the other hand, that freedom of expression has seen a rapid decline in Tanzania, and the government has been essentially responsible for that in the way that it has, either in the recent case with the arrest of Erick Kabendera, detained journalists, or in other cases where it has shut down newspapers. Most recently, in February, the major English newspaper, The Citizen, was shut down for publishing articles that were unfavorable or appeared to be unfavorable to the government. And that has been part of a wider pattern that has taken place in the past 5 years. So while the government has spoken about its work to ensure the protection of journalists, to investigate their abuses and disappearances, it seems like the intention isn't necessarily in that vein.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm asking this question is that the Tanzanian government spokesperson, Mr. Hassan Abbas, saying that journalists face absolutely no threats in the country, and he doesn't know where reports of media repression coming from, and that they are free to do their work unless they breach the law. I mean, this needs to be taken seriously, doesn't it?
Certainly, and I think one of the things that highlights is that one of the forms of repression in Tanzania, as far as freedom of expression, is the law itself. There's several laws that have either been passed or are currently being implemented that essentially prevent journalists, activists, critics of the government from freely expressing themselves. So one could argue that what the government spokesperson said is correct, in that if people do not breach the law, then they're fine. But where the law actually provides creates a repressive environment, as it has shown to do with laws that, for example, there's an act that prohibits the publication of false information online and has been used to essentially repress activists and critics of the government for posts they make on social media, on Facebook, then you could argue that that is actually the means to repression, the law.
Let's talk about the role of the Human Rights Watch. I mean, as a lobby group, what is it that you're going to do in order to ensure that the government accedes to demand of media freedom?
Well, Human Rights Watch, our work involves investigating, exposing, and advocating for change as far as human rights violations are concerned. So we document human rights abuses, in this case, abuses of the right to freedom of expression, abuses against journalists and activists. And we draw attention to that to urge the authorities in Tanzania to make changes and to, in some instances, change the law to make it a less repressive environment, or to ensure that journalists are able to work in an environment that is free.
I guess it starts with talks around the amendment of the Media Services Act in 2016, which, of course, earned President Magufuli great criticism from activists who are saying that this law restricts media freedom in the country. So will the legislators perhaps look into that?
Well, yes, the government has actually recently expressed some level of commitment to changing the law, but that is yet to be seen. I'm speaking specifically about the Media Services Act. And there have also been other positive steps. For example, the Statistics Act, which actually prohibited the publication of independent statistics by individuals or bodies other than the government, has recently been amended to allow for anybody in the country to publish statistics that may contradict what the government is saying. That has changed. So the government has shown some sort of commitment to loosening that grip on freedom of expression, but there are still several other ways and several other pieces of legislation that need to change in order for Tanzania to be a less restrictive space.
So what does the issue of media repression in Tanzania do for Tanzania on the international stage? I mean, Tanzania, in particular, under the leadership of President Magufuli, has been widely credited for his austerity measures in the country since he took office. So would that in any way affect the position or the image of the country on the international stage?
Well, I mean, historically, Tanzania has been one of the more politically stable countries in the region, in East Africa particularly, as compared to its neighbors. But that has been a significant change in the past few years, and it's slowly changing the perception of the country as a free and fair space for activists, for government critics, for political opposition. And that ultimately will affect how people perceive the country and are willing to engage with it. And it's very important that that changes in order for it to maintain the previous reputation that it had.
All right, Mr. Nyeko, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. That was Oryem Nyeko. He is the Uganda and Tanzania researcher in the Africa division, speaking to us live via Skype.